Okay, welcome everybody. We are, as you can see, we're going to look at Christian practices today. So for those who heard earlier, we are going to use that A3 revision sheet, which you may have been given in class. If not, I have just popped it in the chat again, so it should be on the right-hand side for you. I will make this PowerPoint available for you as well on here at the end, just so if it's going too quickly or there's maybe something you missed and you want to add it in, you can always go back and have a look. This is also going to be made into a video and we'll pop it on YouTube. So again, you can go back through and you can pause the video if you need to get any of those key little bits. We're just going to wait one more minute just to see if we've got any more coming. Sorry, I got the timing wrong on this because everyone's been told it's 4:20. So just going to give everyone another moment before we start. So have a pen, pad, paper, and if possible, that A3 sheet. You can either type it straight onto your computer if you open it, or if you've got it printed, even better. So start together in 1 minute. Okay, let's make a start. So I'm not quite sure how interactive this is, so I'm just going to click a little bit and see what I can do. But on your version of this, it should be pretty straightforward because you can click on any of the coloured parts and they take you to where we need to go. I'm going to start with Sacraments, this green area, which is at the top middle of your sort of mind map A3 sheet, just to talk about what a sacrament is. So remember, we're talking about Christian practices now. So how do Christians who believe in love their neighbour as themselves, that God is the most important thing, how do they put that faith into practice every day? How do they go around and making sure that they're making the world a better place and they're being disciples for God? So they look at something called the sacraments first, which is this ritual that outwardly expresses the inner spiritual experience. So how are they showing to the outside world this inner spiritual life? They give a free gift of grace of God's love. Okay, so these are the sacraments which God has given humans as a gift. So there are 7, including marriage, confirmation, reconciliation, etc. But actually the ones that we're going to focus on are baptism and Eucharist, because these are the ones that are common to both Catholics and Church of England. So they're the ones that are focused on in your exam. So the meaning they will impact your relationship with God and whether or not you go into heaven if you do not practice these sacraments. So again, they're given as a gift, so everyone should get baptized. If you get married, it should be in a church. When you become a teenager, you will go through the confirmation process and confirm your faith with God. Eucharist is then that bread and wine, the sort of meal they'll have together on a Sunday. Once you've been confirmed, you can then participate in that. And then reconciliation, this idea of Jesus reconciling the relationship with God. So if we go back, we can then look at baptism first. Let's do baptism. So again, there's an awful lot of information on this page, and I'm not expecting you to write it all down right now. But we'll see is this orange box in the middle is the most important part here for us, because it distinguishes between the 2 main types of baptism. So where does baptism come from? On the left, you'll see that there is a yellow box which says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now this comes at the moment before Jesus' ascension into heaven. It's his last sermon that he's going to have with his followers, and he gives them specific teachings. And so what he says is go and make disciples, go and evangelize, and so we'll come on to that a bit later, and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so 2,000 years later, Christians are still doing this in order to introduce people to the church, in order to wipe away those original sins. Remember, that's the main purpose of this. People, they will be baptized in churches. So you've got the definition here. Baptism is one of the sacraments that all Christian denominations respect. and practice. In the Catholic Church, infants are baptized to welcome them into the Catholic faith and to cleanse them from their innate sin that they are born with, that original sin that we've talked about, that was being inherited from Adam and Eve. So sort of questions to sort of think about here are, is it right to baptize babies? Is it better to wait till they're adults? Obviously, the earlier you baptize someone, the earlier the original sin is taken away. But is it better to wait till someone's an adult so they can freely choose to follow God? Is it as meaningful if a baby is baptized as opposed to somebody choosing it when they're older? So on the left-hand side, you've got this believer's baptism. So this is the Baptist church, really, and sort of Pentecostal churches. They will baptize you when you're not necessarily an adult, but you're old enough to understand it. They think that this is the right way. Also, Jesus is their role model, and Jesus was baptized when he was 30 years old. He was an adult. So they believe that, you know, they're in keeping with what he will do. Some of them will still go to the I've totally just forgotten the name of the river. It's not the Nile. And be baptized anyway in the same place that Jesus was. Whereas others are waiting or still focusing. Jordan, thank you, Mrs. Stone. My goodness, I was hoping you posted in there. The River Jordan, where he was baptized. But is it too late at that point? When you're 30 years old and you're getting baptized, what about all that original sin that you've been burdening? What if you die before you go through baptism? Is this the question that we need to think about? Infant baptism, on the other hand, is obviously an infant, a child. So this is favoured by the Catholic Church, Orthodox, Anglican, so Church of England, Methodist churches. They will baptise babies when they are very young, again to cleanse that idea of original sin, but also to introduce that child into the church, so they become that. They get that support system, and they also feel like they're in that sort of family of God. So again, little questions on here you might want to come back to. Which do you think are more important? You've got a couple of explain questions at the bottom, which could be useful for you for a bit of exam practice. But on the right hand side, just before we move on, it says reasons for being baptized. The main reason people are baptized is to formally enter the church and to be acknowledged as the child of God, which should have a capital G. I'm very sorry. It is also seen as a way to repent and cleanse oneself of sin. They are forgiven and they enter into this new life with Jesus. So let's pop back again to our main page and let's look at the other sacrament, Eucharist. So again, this is Christians living out their life in order to do what Jesus commanded them to do. Before he goes to his crucifixion, before he's arrested, he's at the Passover meal with his followers. And remember, Jesus has said that he knows that he's going to die because he has to die to forgive the sins of the world. And so at that Last Supper, he says words which Christians now repeat every Sunday in church. And the quote is down here and again in the yellow box, and it says, "And the Lord, on the night he was betrayed by Judas, took the bread and broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. In the same way he took the cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." So at the altar at the front of a church, the bread and wine will be prepared by the leader, so whether it's a priest or a vicar, and then it is shared by the congregation, the people who have come to gather there. And again, what is important here is to be looking at, oh, hang on a second. Sorry, my computer just decided to shoot me off the screen. What is important here is to remember the differences in the way and the similarities in the way that Christians practice this. So they will all use a form of bread or wine. Catholics will use sort of wafers instead of actual bread, but they'll use the wine or a sort of wine substitute because it's more about the symbolism of it, it's the blessing of it. For Catholics, though, so in the middle you've got this Catholic Orthodox view on it. They believe in something called transubstantiation, which is a very long word with the brackets. So when it is blessed by the priest, they believe that it becomes the embodiment of the blood and body of Jesus. And so all of it must be consumed. So they're not going to throw any of that wine away. It's all consumed by the vicar or the people who it is around. And it becomes this very important sort of substantial part of their practice. For Protestants, is obviously incredibly important as well, but they don't believe in the transubstantiation part. is a reminder of Jesus's words and actions, and it symbolizes this sacrifice, this body that is broken for them, the blood that is shed for them, which links to this idea of salvation and this focus on the next life and what they want that to be. So communion is one of the main practices that Christians will do. It'll either be weekly or monthly. Quakers have a slightly different way of doing it. Again, they'll have a sort of table in the middle with the bread and the wine on, and they'll go and help themselves, as opposed to it being more formal, where the vicar in a Catholic church, the vicar will come, the priest will be at the front, and the congregants will line up. And in fact, only the priest touches the wafer in the Catholic church. They literally just put it on the tongue of the person getting it, and then they'll take the wine, just because it has been transubstantiated, and it's important that, you know, the person who's leading it only touches it. So again, it's to remember this Last Supper, and it is to, again, to remember the sacrifice of Jesus, literally representing the body and the blood. So it is an important one here. I click on the continue. There's just a few bit more information on here. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time pause on this right now. You can obviously go back onto it, and if you want to have a look. The only word on here that I want to particularly draw your attention to is on the top right, where it talks about liturgy, about liturgical and non-liturgical worship. In a Catholic church, the way that they worship is this becomes part of what is known as the liturgy, the specific words that have to be said by everybody, and it's done in the exact same way across the whole planet. So Catholic Mass, if you go to it in England, is going to be the same as if you go to it in Italy, or if you go to it in South America, because they have this set of words, so you know what to expect. It's that, again, this sense of community that they gather with people from all over the world. All right. Let's go back. So that's your two main ones, your baptism and your Eucharist. Again, when you're revising this, make sure you know what they do, the differences and similarities in what they do. So for example, the Eucharist, they both use the bread, they both use the wine. It still symbolizes the blood and body of Jesus, but Catholics believe in transubstantiation, so it physically changes, whereas for Church of England, it doesn't, so it can be sometimes slightly more informal. So let's go to prayer, because that's another big one on here. So prayer is probably one of the most frequently used practices for Christians. There are lots of different ways of doing it. There's private prayer, where you will spend that personal time communicating in silence with God. This can be done, you know, before bed. It could be done in a church, and this is your informal or even private prayer, where you're by yourself and you're having that sort of conversation. You're saying, thank you very much, God, for all these things that you've done. Maybe you're apologizing and saying, I'm very sorry, I ask for forgiveness for something else that I've done. You could be asking please, so that sort of thank you, sorry, please structure of please, can you help this person, or help me, give me strength. So you can do it privately, and remember, because God is omniscient, he can hear that prayer in your head, and he hears it from your heart, and there's that opportunity there for God to answer it. You've got to remember that Christians believe prayer is a really powerful weapon. They don't believe they're just praying and wishing and hoping. It's not wishy-washy like that. They are having this direct communication with the creator of the universe, and God is taking that time to be able to just respond and say yes or no. There's that kind of adage that God answers all prayers, but sometimes he says no. He's listening, but you know, he's the one who knows what's good for us. So you kind of got to think about prayer as something that is motivating. So when a Christian prays, it's not because they've got nothing else to do. It's the first thing that they should do. They have an issue, the first thing they do is they pray about it, and then they act on something else. For the set prayer, this is your things like the Lord's Prayer. And if you look at the bottom left of this, you've got the reasons why the Lord's Prayer is important. Okay, Jesus says in the Bible, if you don't know how to pray, pray like this. All right, and that's your Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And it covers all the sort of main things: how to worship God, how to think about asking thank you for giving us our daily bread, and then please help us forgive others, forgive us as we do it. And again, it's that thing that connects all churches. All churches are going to say this Lord's Prayer. So, and if you're saying it in England, they're also saying it in America, they're also saying it in Asia. No matter where you go, they will have this same blessing, this same prayer, because it's set. They've decided on the words and everyone is going to follow it. So that's different to your private prayer. Your informal prayer is going to be this a slightly more freely given. You're not really going to get informal prayers very often in places like Catholic churches. This is much more of a sort of Protestant Church of England, Quaker way of worshipping. They will talk from their heart. They'll be moved by the Holy Spirit, and it will become more informal, but they'll do it out loud, and maybe they'll pray for somebody else. They can do something called laying of hands, where they'll literally put their hands on the person who is praying, but it's in a much more informal way. So they're not doing the set prayers like the Lord's Prayer or the Catholic Grace or the Hail Mary, these sorts of ones that have been around for hundreds of years, set in stone, and they repeat them. But they're more personalized for people. They're informal because they are specifically about a time or a place. It might be about something that's going on in the world, about a war, about I don't know, Brexit, about COVID. They would be informal because they will be different in every church around the world. On the right hand side, you've got a little 12 marker here, which at some point you might want to try. It says Christians do not need to worship in a church as long as they pray at home. This is again this idea of God being omnipresent, that he is everywhere all the time. The Holy Spirit is the part of God that is here with us on earth. So do you have to go to a church to pray? Well, no, because God is everywhere and Christians pray at home and they get things out of it. But obviously when you go to a church or you go to a place of worship, when you pray together, you get that sense of community, that sense of togetherness, which you wouldn't necessarily get in a private prayer, but you would get in a set prayer when you've got maybe 400 people in a church all saying the words of the Lord's Prayer at the same time. It gives that sense of community, which maybe you wouldn't get otherwise. So there are benefits of worshipping together. Okay, let's just pop back for a second. So that's prayer. I'm just going to skip over to worship. If I forget to go back to persecution and poverty, then somebody just remind me. We're going to go to worship for the moment because we touched on this earlier. And it's our favourite two words, if you remember from year 9, liturgical and non-liturgical. These are two words that the examiners want you to know because they are in the list of keywords that you need. So if they refer to liturgical prayer, it is, as it says on the left here, a service that follows a set order or ritual. You're very much going to get these in most churches as a form of liturgical worship. So it might be things like receiving forgiveness through actions of a priest. Holy Communion is an example of liturgical worship. So Bible readings, a worldwide set order that is familiar across the world, and rituals passed down by generations of traditions. So liturgical worship are the things that sort of link the modern day church with the church of 2,000 years ago, things that Jesus did with his disciples all the way through the setting up of the church in the early centuries, right up until now. This shared communion of the bread and the wine, the reading extracts from the Bible and reciting the words of Jesus. These are liturgical forms because they follow these set rules and rituals. The non-liturgical side of it is a service that doesn't follow a set order. Follows some early Christians when they meet to hear the word of Christ through the Holy Spirit. So this is where your Quakers come in. Remember, Quakers are given their name because they will sit and, rather than doing any sort of liturgical set rituals, they'll sit and pray and be asked to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And often it's such an overwhelming experience for them that they would literally shake or quake, which is why they were called Quakers. And that's their way of worshipping. That's their way of connecting with God. So faith is expressed in many different ways, such as Holy Communion. Again, they'll have it, but maybe in a bit more less formal way. People share interpretations of the Bible. I was reading this passage and this vision came to me, and something about this passage spoke to me. And so you'd share that in the church with others. Services are different at each time, as people are often taking active roles. So, for example, you might have like a family service where you have children involved in what's going on, and then you might have a more, towards older members of the congregation service. And again, you might tailor it slightly differently. and you may have an emotional impact on feelings of personal relationship with God. Again, it's trying to find different ways to get that connection. Liturgical worship, you're going to be singing hymns and things like that, probably really traditional ones. Non-liturgical, you may have something like a band playing, someone with some drums and grabs a guitar and gets up, and you can sing more modern day hymns in order to be able to be part of this. So again, liturgical is going to be prayer, things like the Lord's Prayer. And then you will say things like the Lord's Prayer in the non-liturgical, but you might also use informal prayer. So someone will stand up and say, this thing is happening in the world today. Let us as a congregation pray on this and ask God's guidance, ask him to help us understand this, show us how to act and what we should be doing in response to it. So again, just those two types, it's important to know the similarities and differences within the way that they worship. So they worship similarly because they've both got God at the core of it. Okay, they're both reacting to his message, to his to the Bible, to the words that Jesus spoke in the Gospels, and they're finding ways of connecting with him. So again, different ways of worshiping. You've got obviously prayer. You've got so I think on your sheet you've got a few like blank spaces, so types of worship, and these are the ways that they'll do it. So through music, through prayer, through outreach. So you might worship by going and working for a charity. You could worship through meditation. You could worship through reciting set prayer. There's lots of different ways that Christians will do this. It could be through giving money. It could be through going on pilgrimage. Anything that brings you closer to God and that shows your adoration towards him, that you are doing an outward expression of that spirituality, so God can see your good works, is a type of worship. Okay, let's nip on to our main two festivals here, so Easter and Christmas. We'll start with Christmas, as Christmas is coming up soon. Now, Christmas, remember, is the celebration of Jesus's incarnation. The month of Advent leading up to it, so from the first Sunday in December, is the sort of countdown, if you like, the Advent to Jesus's arrival. As we know, Jesus wasn't actually born on the 25th of December, but that is the day that is remembered because we don't know the exact date that he was born, but it was probably sometime in the spring. The last 12 days accumulate in the feast on the 25th of December, but all this time is a time when Christians will be going to church. They'll be thinking about this gift of God coming to earth. Many churches have carol services. We won't be having a carol service at our school because we are a Church of England school. Reminding people of the nativity story of, it's famous and infamous in primary schools in England. You have children recreating it with all sorts of animals which aren't mentioned in the Bible but are always fun to see people dressed up as. And there is a gift that is exchanged to remind them of the gifts that the wise men gave Jesus. Remember, the gold signifying his kingliness, that he was a king. The frankincense, which is like incense which you burn, and you would normally do that when you're worshipping God, so that represented his godliness. And then you've got the myrrh, which is actually something you anoint dead bodies with, and so that again is a symbol of the fact that Jesus was going to die and for them, and he, right at this moment when he's born, it's the knowledge that they know that this child is special. And Christmas is a really joyous time. It's a time of goodwill. It's a time of hope, of love and compassion to be shown towards others. And Epiphany is the last day really of this Christmas festival, and that's on the 6th of January. And that's when they believe that the wise men came and actually delivered those gifts. That's the day of Epiphany. It's also why in British society we think we have to take down all our decorations by the 6th, because traditionally that is the last day of the Christmas celebrations in the church, and it's just now become one of those things that people know have to come down by the 6th. But why? That's why, because it's Epiphany. Secular Christmas again is different. So when you are talking about Christmas, try and make sure, if it's a question about how do Christians celebrate Christmas, you stick to the Christian side of it. The sort of eating turkey, you know, all the mince pies and the cards and things is very much a sort of secular side to this. It's become a festival about charity and thanksgiving, which is fantastic because those are part of the Christians' journey here. But actually, it has obviously become a bit more about Santa, and who originally was Father Christmas, who was a Christian, you know, role model. But it's important to try and distinguish between these two things. Jesus is the light of the world, which is why a lot of candles and lights are used at Christmas. So you can see the 4 pictures at the bottom. You've got the carol services to celebrate Jesus' birth. You've got the gift giving. It's not just about the gifts that the wise men give, but it's also the idea that Jesus is a gift from God. He was the gift that was received on the planet, which would ultimately lead to the salvation of humans. Christmas lights, again, this Jesus, the light coming into the darkness. The world was in darkness and Jesus comes. He is the light, he's the truth. He was showing them the way back to heaven. So there's lots of lights and festivals of lights and things that happen during this time. And then of course you've got the nativity scene, just again, because Christians are supposed to be spreading this message of God. And it gives them that opportunity to teach their children this miraculous virgin birth, and this saviour born into a stable, not born in a holy, in a grand palace like a king should be, but born in a stable, because that just kind of shows those origins of him being born into this sort of poverty. He didn't come to save the rich and the famous, he came to save everybody. So that's an important part of it as well. On the right hand side, you've got a quote here from Catholic Mass, which says, "Father, you make this holy night radiant with the splendour of Jesus Christ, our light. We welcome him as Lord, the true light of the world." So again, if you're going to talk about Christmas and the fact that they use Christmas lights, then say why. Say because Jesus is the light of the world and he came in. At Christmas, Christians exchange gifts. Why? To remember the gifts of the wise men and the fact that Jesus was a gift to come to earth. They will also put nativity scenes. Why? In order to teach their children about the story, about the miraculous story of Jesus and everything that he did and what his life came to mean. So don't just, obviously, it's easier because we live in a society where Christmas is part of our lives, but be able to focus on the truly Christian parts of that, and not about the other parts. Again, that he is this sense of hope, this sense of goodwill and peace, because that's what Jesus' message was for the planet. You could get a 12 marker in this, which talks about, you know, the secular version of Christmas versus the religious, and so there is obviously a crossover between the two. But is there a worry that it's becoming too secular, and are we taking the Christ out of Christmas? And thinking about, are we losing the true meaning of it, and is it becoming more about, you know, people get themselves in debt every year, spending thousands of pounds on presents that they can't afford because they feel like that's what's supposed to happen at Christmas, when that's literally the opposite of what's supposed to be happening at Christmas. It's supposed to be a time of joy and goodwill, and you know, if you can give a gift, great, but that's not the expectation, whereas unfortunately that's kind of what it's become in society. So you can see that 12 marker on the right, which says Christmas is no longer a Christian festival. And is that okay that it's become a bit more secularized, or should it be, you know, reclaimed by just Christians only? But is that very fair? And Christmas is more important than Easter, and we'll discuss that one in a minute if we've got time when we've looked at Easter. So Christmas, incarnation of Jesus, birth of Jesus, super important, and they celebrate it in lots of nice fantastic ways. Just make sure you've got some specific examples, but you can also say why they do it. They have lights at Christmas. Why? Because they represent that Jesus is the light of the world. All right, let's go back and have a look at Easter. So again, Easter, some would argue, is the most important Christian festival that celebrates the resurrection, or the death and resurrection of Christ, including the events that led up to this. Christians celebrate it with a service, processions, similar to that of what Christ did. So at Easter, it links into pilgrimage as well. They will retrace Jesus' steps in Jerusalem. It's called the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, and they'll walk in those footsteps of Jesus. In fact, some pilgrims will go and they'll carry a cross, literally a tree, through those streets up to Golgotha, the place of the skull where Jesus is killed, to recreate and to sort of feel and experience some of those things that Jesus did. The important links that you've got here is obviously this is about the salvation and atonement of sin, and their freedom Christians are no longer afraid of death. Death has lost its sting, because no longer when they die are they going to go to hell, but they have this opportunity for heaven. John 3:16 quote, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." That hope of eternal life, that hope that Jesus has given, is only fulfilled through this Easter day. Good Friday, the day that Jesus dies, Christians will go to church, and they will it's a time of mourning. Yes, it'll be a sort of more somber affair. Sometimes they will have crosses that will be laid bare, which are then turned into flowers on the day of the resurrection on the Easter Sunday. But the whole of Easter starts, if we remember, so let's think about this in terms of a timeline. You've got Shrove Tuesday, which is at the beginning of the period, where they will, or we call it Pancake Day, where they will use up, traditionally they would use up all the sort of sweet unleavened things in the house. And then you have the week leading up to Easter Sunday. So you have Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter Sunday, which is to remember Jesus going into Jerusalem on the donkey, and they laid the palm leaves out in front of him. Then that brings is Holy Week, the week that leads up to that. So you've then got Maundy Thursday, which is on the Thursday, which remembers the Last Supper, which is the bread and the wine. But also at this point, Mary washed Jesus's feet. So there is traditionally in churches a feet washing ceremony where the vicar or the priest will wash the congregant's feet as a symbolic gesture, because it was this idea that Jesus washed his disciples' feet at this point as well, to show that no one is above anyone else. It's a show of equality, the show of love, just to take care of somebody in this way. And so some Christians will reenact this during Easter. You then have, obviously, that evening would have been the time that Jesus was then betrayed and arrested. Good Friday is the day he goes to the cross, so they will go to church on Good Friday and think about that sacrifice. Then on the third day he rose again, so that's the Sunday, the Easter Sunday, when everyone will go to church. It'll be much more celebratory. It will be Jesus has conquered death. He is risen from the dead. This was this at the top right hand side. All Christians will say this at the same time. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. He gave everybody this option of heaven. So Easter is this wonderful celebration where there'll be flowers everywhere on Easter Sunday, representing new life. The egg of Easter eggs, which we now have a bit more secular again view on, but it was this idea that it represented the new life that Jesus now promises through his resurrection. Orthodox, you've got here, they walk around the church at midnight on Saturday and enter the church, symbolizing the tomb. Priests will say, "Christ is risen," and they will reply, "He is risen indeed." That's used in other churches as well. Catholics in the Church of England begin in darkness at the church and then light the Paschal candle. The Paschal candle is a very, very large candle. It's probably about 4 foot tall and very thick. And it is lit again to show this idea of Jesus being the light of the world and the risen Christ. So it will have been in darkness on Good Friday, and then it'll be lit on Easter Sunday. And then it ends with the communion, the sharing of the bread and the wine. Again, others, they organise outdoor breakfasts and eggs, but this is normally like scrambled eggs rather than chocolate eggs, because they are a symbol of new life. They've just become a bit more chocolatey over the years. So again, when you're looking at this thing about which one's more important, Christmas or Easter, obviously Christmas is the incarnation of Jesus, which enables Easter to become possible and the salvation to become possible. But most Christians would recognize Easter as the most important because of this salvation, the purpose of Jesus, of God coming to earth, coming into human flesh, was so that his pure blood could be sacrificed on that cross, so humans could be reconciled with God, so that they could bridge that sin away, wash that sin away, and once again have the option of heaven if they believe in Jesus and do his good works. Let's pop on to pilgrimage then. So there's lots of different pilgrimages that we could look at. We've mentioned one briefly, which is the one in Jerusalem, which you can walk, the Via Dolorosa, which thinks about Jesus's journey from where he is condemned to Golgotha, the place of the skull. And you can visit the garden tomb. There's like a hole in the ground where they believe the foot of the cross was. There's a stone slab where his body was laid, and that's all under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is there now. So it's a place of pilgrimage that Christians can go to. The other two that the exam board would like you to know about are Lourdes and Iona. Quick revision on this: Lourdes is the place in southwest France where is a place of healing. The Saint Bernadette had an encounter with the Virgin Mary, who pointed out a spring of water. She was healed herself by drinking from it, and then she brought it to attention to a local group of nuns and sort of pointed out this is where it was. This cave, this is now called the Grotto, which you can go to, where the Virgin Mary continued to appear to St Bernadette. And about 67 people in the last few, so lots of people have claimed to be healed by going there and drinking from the waters. Obviously, millions of people go there every year. So since scientists have started to think, well, maybe we should be testing this and seeing if this is valid in any way, there's been about 67 people in the last 40 or 50 years who scientists haven't been able to explain yet how it was possible they have been healed. Lots of people go and say they've been spiritually healed, so maybe they have been suffering from something like anxiety or depression, and then they left and they didn't feel that anymore. Unfortunately, you can't really necessarily prove that one way or another of how you felt when you got there versus how you felt when you left. But as I say, 67 sort of confirmed, if you like, miracles in terms of scientists can understand how the person had been healed. Could be coincidence, could be a miracle. What do? They visit the grotto where the Virgin Mary was. They pray, they bathe in the holy waters, or at least they can take some of the holy waters and drink in it. Many pilgrims who go are disabled, so they are able. They have able-bodied helpers, and there's often hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that make this pilgrimage possible. Some of them even school students who go in order to be able to support the Catholics and other Christians who will go to do that. Iona is a very small island off the west coast of Scotland. You had to go across the Isle of Mull to get there. It's another place of pilgrimage dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Many pilgrims feel like Iona is a place where nature reveals God's infinite power and presence, and is very remote and windswept. They call it the thin place. Is another way of describing it. That when you're there, that the atmosphere is like you're very close to God. There's a sort of thinner veil between you and heaven at that point, and it is an island dedicated to prayer. And some people live there, but not very many. It's mostly for pilgrims, and there's lots of walks you can do, a big sense of community, and there's an abbey there where people will go and worship. There is hikes to different parts of the island, and obviously there's lots of Bible teachings and things that will go on with people who are there. So in the middle, you've got this, why do you go on pilgrimage? To grow closer to God is going to be number one. Express sorrow for sin. Maybe something has gone wrong in your life and you feel like you need to get closer to God and make that contact and ask for forgiveness. So maybe you put yourself out a little bit, rather than just going down to your local church or just closing your eyes before bedtime. You actually go and like show that you're willing to change, that you are sorry and you want something to happen. To reflect on your life, particularly when facing a crisis or a big decision, take that time out and go and spend some time with God. It's physically to go to a place can make a real big difference. They often come back with a new enthusiasm and a better understanding of their faith. And to be cleansed from sin is obviously going to be a big part of that as well. Okay, so again, there's all questions you might get on this. 4-marker or 5-marker, explain 2 contrasting ways Christians go on pilgrimage or on a journey. They should really use the keyword pilgrimage for you. And then the 12-marker, there is no difference between a pilgrimage and a holiday. That's a really interesting one, because again, you've got this idea that, well, it's just like going on holiday, isn't it? You're going to an island off of Scotland, or you're going to France, or you're going to Israel, like it's just going on holiday. But I don't know about you, but when I go on holiday, I don't tend to think the number one thing in my mind is to grow close to God, or I don't want to go on a 7-mile hike or go and sit in a church for 24 hours and pray to God. You go to relax, maybe, but the purpose of a pilgrimage is very different. You go for a spiritual reason, not just to relax, but to gain something, to grow closer to God, grow in your knowledge, gain the sense of community, reconnect with something that maybe you've lost. And it's very different. That's very different to the purpose of a holiday. But obviously, you are journeying somewhere. It is something new. You would probably sightsee a bit while you're there, and it has similarities to it. But you can't underestimate the sort of spiritual side of this. All right, let's pop back. Let's do persecution and poverty. So we're going to jump back up to this red one. Now again, there is a lot of stuff on here, and I'm just going to touch on it. So again, if you want to go back and have a little look, you can, but I'm aware that we've only got about 20 minutes, and so not a huge amount of time left. Now, persecution has been a part of Christianity since its very conception. Jesus himself was persecuted. He was put to death for, the teachings and things that he had. He then charged his disciples to carry on, and he said to them, in the Great Commission, go and make disciples of nations. So they knew that they were going to have to take on this mantle, and all the disciples suffered very similar fates to Jesus and were eventually martyred and killed for their faith. But Christianity is actually is the most persecuted Christian religion in the world, which seems strange because obviously in our country we're very free, we have a lot of freedom of religion, but in other parts it's not the case. Whether it's because their country, their political beliefs are that religions are not right, or whether it's opposing religions have control of the country. But actually trying to evangelize and speak out about your faith in certain areas is actually very dangerous and can put you in prison and sometimes cost you your life still today. But Christians do think that it is their duty to go and do this, and to stand up in face of persecution, and if needs be die and for their faith in God, rather than convert to a different religion or deny that they have that faith in the first place. Obviously, the conviction that takes is huge, and it's very tricky. But some people are doing this in the world at the moment. We've got a couple of quotes here. This one on the left is really useful. If it ever starts with blessed, it's probably from the Sermon on the Mount, which this one is, where Jesus is saying, these people are blessed. And so it says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. So you're blessed by God if you are being persecuted for standing up for what is right. That basically is what that means. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. It's okay if you've got persecution in this life. It's obviously not okay. It's not great. But Christians know that they will be rewarded in heaven. They are doing what is right. They are standing on the side of what is right. And so even if they die in these trials, they will be rewarded in heaven. The other quote says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. This is Jesus. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own, but as it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. If the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. There's that sort of solidarity that Jesus does. And remember, this is part of the thing about why is it important that God became incarnate. It's for this exact reason, so that when Christians are being persecuted and they're suffering, they know that their God came and was persecuted and suffered too. That's that sort of solidarity that they have with God, that they sort of experience the same things. No, it's not all negative, and at the bottom it says this, it's not all bad. Not all persecution is totally negative. It may also help Christians to develop their faith and strengthen their convictions as believers. So again, if you're a Christian and someone challenges you and says, I don't believe what you're saying, you defend your faith, and therefore you become more certain in your own convictions. It's also just very tricky when it becomes something that you could be imprisoned or even killed for. So you've got a couple of examples here, and it's always good to have at least one example, please, at your disposal of how people are persecuted, but also how people are trying to stop it. So you've got Coromila community at the top. This is a really useful one for lots of different things, including your themes unit when you're looking at protesting and conflict between religions, because this is the one that is based in Ireland. And it started in 1965, and it's to promote harmony and reconciliation. They were specifically working with Catholics and Protestants in Ireland to stop the persecution that was happening there, trying to focus them on their similarities and less on their differences. You've also got the Barnabas Fund, who send financial support to projects that help Christians suffering from discrimination, oppression, persecution because of their faith. Places like China, if you try, you can be a Christian in China, but you can't be openly evangelizing. You can't openly evangelize your religion. So it's very difficult to get hold of things like Bibles. So people try and smuggle Bibles in, and if they are caught, can be put in prison for it. And it's very strange to think these things still happen in the world today, but they absolutely do. You've also got the Christian Solidarity Worldwide, CSW, and this campaigns for religious freedoms by documenting and raising awareness, influencing governments who affect the oppressed, offering training of human rights, and also helping the oppressed speak up. If we look at poverty then quickly, again, you all know what poverty is, so I'm not going to spend too much time going through that, but you think about the sort of different types in terms of poverty of education, poverty of food, shelter, basic accommodation and needs. The difference is that Christians feel like they are called to administer to these people. Jesus came to speak to those in poverty, and he came to save everybody. And on the right, it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. One thing you lack, he said, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. Jesus promotes giving up earthly belongings because possessions have absolutely no use to you in heaven. So do not store up treasures on earth, it says in the Bible. You must think about your actions towards others. So there are countless Christian charities that you can look at. Christian Aid is the easiest one to remember, probably. It's the one that our school supports quite frequently. And it's the Christian Aid is the official relief and development agency for over 41 church denominations in Britain and Ireland. It began in 1945. Their aim is to encourage sustainable development, stop poverty, and provide emergency relief in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, South America, and the Caribbean. Really what they do is they are the kind of disaster relief people. So if there's a war, if there's a natural disaster, they're going to make sure food, water, medical supplies, anything like that gets to where it needs to immediately. And it does this by raising funds. Tear Fund there as well is an organisation called the Evangelical Alliance Launch Tear Fund, known as what says that? Across the UK, churches donate, hold fundraising events, they pray for awareness. So they're not just raising money, they will go and volunteer for these charities. They will do things locally as well. So again, when they give to homeless charities and things, or they give to food banks like we just did our Harvest Food Bank, to respond to poverty. It's not just about thinking, oh dear, poverty's sad. It's about doing something about it and having that action. That's where this practice really comes into it. Okay, let's just pop back for a second. What time is it? Okay. Now this role of the worldwide church is split into three areas here, because the church has a worldwide presence. The church is in every country pretty much in the world. How has it got there? Through evangelism. It promotes reconciliation between people, but also street pastors is a kind of non-evangelical side of this. So you've got to, oh, this wasn't the right thing. Yeah, that's okay. They are called to evangelize. Okay, remember at the Great Commission, just before Jesus ascends, he says, go and make disciples of nations. They want to grow the church. That's the thing. They want people to become Christians because they think that Jesus is the way to heaven, and without him, you can't go there. So what do? They go and evangelize. And evangelize means share their faith. To be a true disciple of God, you should evangelize. And if you're not, then you're not doing it properly. So what do? they will try and grow the church. In 1910, there were 291 million Catholics. In 2010, there were 1.1 billion Catholics in the world. Okay, so they are continuing to grow the church. It's growing most rapidly in places like South America, Africa, and Asia, because these are places that before had other religions and didn't necessarily have Christianity. So they would send missionaries over to, so Europe would send missionaries to these places to translate the Bible into local languages so they could access the Word of God. And they would go because they believe it's their duty to God to make sure everyone has the opportunity to do it. It's not about forced conversion, like you must now believe in God, or will only help you if you believe in God. They will help anyone regardless of their religion or faith. But it's about giving them that opportunity if they want to. So there's lots of Facebook presence, Twitter, newspapers. There's even God TV, which is on either Sky or something like that, on one of the digi channels. They have, and literally will just have Christian broadcasting all day. The BBC has to do a certain amount of hours of religious content every week, and a lot of that is taken up by Songs of Praise on Sunday. And how many, there are also many different charities which are devoted to helping the church growth. So anything that sort of enables missionaries to go and do this job. So there are some that raise money in order to send missionaries to remote places. They'll go there and stay with the people for like 2 years, and they'll learn their language. They'll literally sit with them, live with them for 1 or 2 years, learn their language, and then they'll translate the Bible into that language for them. You know, there's lots of different ways that they will do this so that they can evangelize. It's tricky to evangelize. It's one of those things that actually, you know, it's difficult to do, particularly if you're a Christian or if you have a lot of non-Christian friends. How do you evangelize to them without them being like, oh no, talking about God again? But actually trying to see the positives in it and say, well, actually, these is great because you have this community, you have lots of other things. But there is this idea about not being a pastor in your own town. So sometimes it's easier to evangelize to people that you don't know because, you know, they don't have certain expectations of you. Let's look at street pastors then real quick. So these are the ones that we probably have watched some videos of in class. Now their role, and this is very important, is not to evangelize. Okay, the street pastors are there to be pastors. They're there just to love people and help people. So they will go out into the community. So there's a group in Reading that do this, and they will go out at 2 or 3 in the morning, and all the drunk people who are on the street, not so much at the moment, lockdown, street pastors are obviously not very busy, and they will put them in taxis. They will give them flip-flops to walk home in, instead of the girls walking home holding their high heels. They give them fruit pastels. I don't really know why, it's just one of those things that they've become known for having, fruit pastels. And they will just make sure people are safe and people are okay. They'll phone ambulances, they'll walk people in places, doing things that basically the police don't have time for. They're dealing with the sort of legality of stuff, but it's the antisocial behaviour that actually they can potentially discourage or really just help with. Again, they're not going to go and say, oh dear, you're in this terrible way, let me tell you about Christianity so you can not get yourself in this position anymore. They just want to make sure people are safe. And again, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, there's this idea that you must show to get into heaven, and you know how Jesus is going to separate the sheep from the goats, the righteous from the unrighteous, is by, were you able to show this unconditional love to other people? And actually this is what the street pastors are trying to do. If someone's very drunk and passed out on the side of the road and probably is a bit in a mess, you know, it's not the sort of person that you normally run towards to go and help, but this is what street pastors do because they're Christians, and it's that selfless agape, that unconditional love for people. And so they will try and help the local community. Other things they do, obviously food banks. There's a big push for this during harvest time, but obviously throughout the rest of the year. The Trussell Trust has become quite a famous one over lockdown, because they are the ones who have been really pushing for donations of food or money from people who can, in order to support families who've been hit really hard by COVID, by redundancies, by split families, or just, you know, people who've got 5 children at home and maybe can't afford to feed them every single day. So they're a food bank that was making daily deliveries to people's houses to try and support them a little bit in this time of need. And it's amazing how many people are actually brought to that level of poverty in the UK through just, you know, a couple of weeks of not having work for some reason. But those places are there for that reason. So on the left hand side, you can see in the parable of the sheep and goats, it says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me." So this is what they're going to do. The worldwide church is going to reach out to those people in need. And obviously the last part of that, which is missed off, but I think hopefully you should know, is that you were in prison and you came to visit me. And that was obviously really important when you get to the themes unit of religion, crime and punishment, and why the prison fellowship program exists. So that Christians go into prisons and actually spend time with these prisoners and try and administer to them if they can, just without judgment. Again, not to convert, but just to be a human and support them and love them when no one else will. So again, there's a few more pieces of information on there for you, a couple of questions on there. So explain 2 ways that the church helps local communities. So again, this is practices. So not those, oh, they'll love people, but they'll love them by becoming a street pastor and going out and ministering to them, by putting together homeless charities or food banks, by nursing. So there's another thing on here about parish nurses who provide healthcare for people who maybe can't afford it. Last one on here then is reconciliation. So the practice of reconciliation is a really tricky concept. But reconciliation is one of the sacraments as well that we have about restoring this faith with God, or this relationship with God after a breakdown. So we had a fantastic relationship in the Garden of Eden with God. He walked amongst, walked with Adam and Eve. Sin had this huge gap between us. Jesus, however, then reconciled that relationship through the atonement, the cleansing of the sin, which is known as salvation. And we too now have a responsibility to reconcile others, find people who maybe are not getting along, and can Christians go and maybe try and bridge the gap and bring them together and seek reconciliation for them. In Matthew, down on the left hand side, it says, "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brothers and sisters have something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go to be reconciled to them and then come and offer your gift." So don't come to God giving offerings when you know there's something broken in your relationship with somebody. You should go and seek reconciliation with them first, and then go and seek reconciliation with God. And again, there's a couple of examples here of how Christians might do that. Irish Churches for Peace project. Again, this is about Catholics and Protestants and bringing them together instead of killing each other, which they unfortunately were doing for a while. Communities of the Cross of Nails at Coventry Cathedral, set up after the bombing of the cathedral in World War II. Local Christians wish to forgive and not seek revenge. And this links again to these sort of themes of forgiveness and things that you've looked at in the belief section. So as I said, that was quite tricky, and there's a lot of information there. I've popped the, I haven't actually done it yet. I'll put it in there now. I'll put the actual slideshow in there if you want to download it and have a little look. And, or as I say, we'll make this into a video so you can go back and pause it if you need to. But hopefully that was most of that. Can you just pop in the chat? Is there anything that I missed? I talked about mission, about going abroad. I think I covered everything on there. Not really sure. I'm going to leave it there for the moment, unless you have any questions. Just give me a minute to ask any questions. Okay. If not, if you are free to go, thank you very much for coming. Oh, hang on, what question have I got? Okay, good times. All right then, enjoy your evening. I'll pop the PowerPoint in there now for you so you can save it. It'll be available in the chat, but it's just there if you want it.